late spring, 928 she should return to Beric. Osrith knew. God in heaven, she should not have left. But how was Osrith meant to know that Eswi was on the way to her? And as she looked across at the fortress that Osrith had called home for so many years, a good part of her felt that she never should have left. It had been 2 Norse guards outside Dumnotter who had challenged Osrith when she got to the front gate, but she was not in the mood to talk to them. "Do you wish to die?" Osrith asked them when one held a sword out in front of her, which she wrestled off the man and pointed to his chest. "Who goes there?" was called from above. "Osrith of Beric." She called back Mathair. The cry came from, of course, Edra, who Osrith had not seen since she had married Anlaf. Calls that Osrith was there headed around the castle, and, after a few minutes there was a creaking at the gate. "The now," Osrith said to the man she had disarmed, before looking at the other, unable to hide his fear as Malcolm, Domhnall's son, pulled open the gates. She embraced Edra, who had come running to her, a young woman, full of the same life that Osrith knew, enthusing about her move to Man, and how she was looking forward to being queen there. And Osrith ate, in the kitchens with the ancient Glimri, as she spoke to the 2 children who were her nephew and niece, Stjora and Sigtrygg's children, who had been brought to Dumnotter when plague had come to Ofoik, and no attempt had been made to give them back. "They are Anlaf's kin," Edra had said, and had been spending a lot of time with little Gisla and Ragnar, teaching them, telling them of their Norse and Danish ancestry. They had come out with Edra and had stood by her side, and from what Osrith remembered of both people after whom the children had been named, Gisla, with her long, thin face, and Ragnar, with his fair features, looked like their grandmother and great-uncle. "Domhnall is out on the Trinity, and Eswi has gone to you, to tell you about Ethelistan coming," Malcolm told Osrith as they sat together in the kitchens. "Uncle is out, for there was a skirmish over out towards Stirling, Sellark with him. I came at an unfortunate time," Osrith told him, and went on to tell Malcolm that she suspected that Ethelistan was going to come north. "Uncle thinks he will," Malcolm told her, "and we are to be prepared." He looked to Osrith, as he picked up an ale jug, and to all the world. He looked just like his father. His manner, too, was like the only man Osrith thought of as king, and he nodded, sagely, when he listened to Osrith's reasons for coming. "Stay," Malcolm told her, "leave tomorrow, take some more guards with you. Be with Edra, I know she had been delighted you have come home." Home, Osrith thought. Dumnotter was home, to her, and felt a little ashamed that she had come all the way to tell Constantine about Ethelistan. "What did you promise him in terms of a tribute?" Constantine asked her, coming to her chamber that night. Osrith had been asleep, so very asleep in her old bed at the back of the kitchens that she had not woken until she had felt warmth next to her body. At first, she had thought it was fine, but very quickly her senses told her that she was not at Beric, and that the body was clothed. She sat up, pulling her shirt over her when she realized it was Constantine. He smiled in the half-light, and took her hand. "I promised to match your tribute," Osrith told him sleepily, glancing uncertainly to the king of Alba. He was not the young boy, the young man she had once known. He was godly, and did not make to touch her. Nevertheless, she reached for her cloak and pulled it around her shoulders. "Ethelistan will have noticed you went, will see it as a slight." "What will you do?" he asked. "Continue to serve my people," Osrith replied. "Keep them safe, help them thrive. Do what I can to avert a war that might kill them." "And Finan?" Constantine asked. "He has an oath to fulfill," she told him. "He will be with me when he is not with my brother." "He has an oath to fulfill to you," Constantine reminded her, and sat next to Osrith until the morning. Constantine had known, of course, that Ethelistan was coming. So, not now, but soon. Osrith knew there would be a war at some time. But when? Anlaf had the promise of Ofoik and Cumbraland, the Gwynedians so desperate to be independent of Highwold that they would look to Osrith. He had Guthrith, battered and bruised from Ofoik still, yet bringing Norse into Englaland down the Merse still, past Ethelistan's nose at Seaster. And if Ofoik and Cumbraland together was too much for Anlaf, Then there were Sigtrager and Stora's children, Osrith's niece and nephew. Anlaf and Edra were caring for them, and the young Ragnar, though only 10, could well be moulded into king in his own right, to follow his father. What better than a child who had grown up in Alba, under Constantine's watchfulness? The north of England could well fall back to being Northumbria. Aethelstan's force could be limited to Mercia again. I am glad Finan Beeg chose to return with Finan, Constantine told her, in the morning. He was standing, now, in the kitchen, as Osrith got up, startling Elasad and Glimri with his unexpected presence. How could he not, when Utad chose to claim him? Osrith replied, because Finan chose to claim him. It could have caused a rift, a dispute, and I did not want to see any of our men at odds with one another over that. He would have seen that, Constantine told her. I wish him to be in service be with his father, Osrith reiterated, and she noticed in the early morning light Constantine flinch. She knew he believed young Finan to be his child, yet Osrith knew he had to go be Finan's. She had also been taunted about this by Utad so many times that the words were beginning to stick. He spoke Gaelish, Norse and Anglish with an Gaelish accent. He did have a resemblance to Constantine, yet, so did Finan, for they were very distantly related. Yet what mattered was what Finan believed, and Osrith knew deep down he believed young Finan was his. He is on the border, with my men, Constantine said. Osrith nodded. In my land, Constantine said, deliberately. He claimed to the wall. All knew this. So, it could be said that, if he believed young Finan to be his son, that his son was already within the land that was rightfully his. Finan met Osrith as she got to the pack horse bridge that spanned the two-eyed. He was alone, and looked as if he had been waiting for some time. I went to tell Constantine what had happened here, Osrith told him, when her horse crossed, and they rode back to their farm together. I did not ask, Finan told her. And they rode together, back to their home, for 6 years of peace, more or less. Mercenaries came to stay with them, ostensibly guarding Berwick, as the Alba warriors did. All rubbed along together, and were sorry to leave when they were replaced with new warriors and guards, sometimes bringing greetings and food, sometimes bringing news. Aldhelm returned to Mercia a year later, but arrived back not long after to tell of a plot that Aethelstan had been attacked with the intent of blinding him again and seize the throne for himself. Miral and Elfkin told her that his younger brother, Edwin, had been accused of the plot and been cast out to sea, and had not been heard of again. It was an old punishment, one which put the punishment in the hands of God. That this punishment had happened during a stormy season in the summer seemed to have limited God's clemency towards the prince. That he had not survived meant that, by this ancient method, Edwin had indeed been declared to be the usurper. And in 931, Aethelstan called for the kings of Cymru, of Strathclyde and Cumbraland, Bibbenburg and of Alba, to kneel to him at Cirencester, on the border between Wessex and Mercia. King Morganhen of Glywysing, and Gwen submitted to the overlordship of King Aethelstan of England. Her son told her, after he had returned from the ceremony with his father and uncle. Owain was there, for Strathclyde, Tudrap Griffrey of Brychinniog and Hywel Dda of Deheubarth was there, and his son, Idwelfl of Gwynedd. Idwelfl? Osrith asked. I knew you would ask, Mather, young Finan told her. Prince Sindlan also came, and then, on the morning of the ceremony, was seen riding away back to Aberfraw. It is thought that he was making sure that Hywel's son was there, in Cirencester, before staging the overthrow of the South Cymru and taking back of his father's throne. So that was it, Osrith thought, as she stood in the fields watching her farmers gather the harvest for yet another year. The North Cymru were still holding out for independence and, presumably, the hope that Queen Gwyddylth would lead this for them. And tribute? Osrith asked, wondering what her tithe bill was going to be. Whatever Constantine paid, she had promised Aethelstan, and she would not renege on it, even if she had to go and vey herself to steal it. What did Constantine bring? After a few moments, Osrith realized that her son was staring at her. What? She asked. You don't know? Young Finan asked. No, Osrith said, slowly. Humor me, son. There was no tribute paid by Alba. Constantine did not come to bow to Aethelstan in Mercia. No, Constantine? Osrith asked, her heart sinking. Young Finan shook his head. She felt a jolt in her stomach. It was going to begin, now, she thought. Not very long, and Aethelstan would be marching into her land again. Constantine must feel very confident with his allegiances that he had rejected Aethelstan's overlordship. She must post watchers on her southern borders, Osrith told herself. Bean's family's farm was over that way. She would get the young man to organize this. He knew the land the best. And what about you? Osrith asked, putting an arm around her son's shoulders. Now your uncle and your father have returned to Bibbenberg. What about me? You will be 21 in December. Utad can only claim you until you are 21, if he could claim you at all. She watched as her son turned his head towards the Tuide and Bernicia's higher hills. I have learned a good deal at Bibbenberg, young Finan told her. Young Utad and I fight well together. This is what Osrith had heard when her husband had last visited. So I will stay, young Finan told her. When I am 21, and should my uncle give me the choice, I would stay at Bibbenberg with my father. 88,888,888 in the year 934, wrote the monks in the Winchester monastery that oversaw the keeping of King Alfred's chronicles. The English king Aethelstan invaded Scotland by land and sea with a large force. The Norse king of Dublin, who had briefly ruled Northumbria, had died, resulting in insecurity amongst the Danes and the Norse. In Irian, Murchada, High King of Irian, read the words that his monks at Clonmacnoise from a report prepared by his cousin, Domnall Macht, that a great leader had been subdued in northern Northumbria. Subdued, yes, but not dead. Utad of Bibbenberg had merely distanced himself from the fury that was the condensing and fortifying of Aethelstan's England army, and would let him pass unchallenged through his lands. To Domnall's amazement as he watched the whole scene happen at sea, before he himself was ambushed by Aethelstan's fleet and was made to flee north in retreat. What Domnall actually said about Utad's betrayal, the monks chose not to commit to parchment. But this was yet to happen. At the beginning of the year 934, no army had convened at Winchester, no fleet had been gathered at Hampton. And he was not alone. Osrith would wonder whether her conversation and agreement with Hywel had not been a mistake to agree to be queen to the Gwynedians. Had it been a ploy, to use as evidence against her, to use as a reason to have the Mersons and West Saxons under Aethelstan's banner, march to Aberfraw and reinstate Eadwulf as king of Gwynedd? Unheard of, before that time, that Anglish and Saxon warriors would be chosen by one Cymric king to ally with against another. For, with Aethelstan and the England army and navy, marching beside Aethelstan, was Hywel and the newly reinstated Eadwulf, Morgan ap Owain and Dewdrap Griffry, reminiscent of the days long past, where Mercia was allied with some of the Cymric on the occasions of invasions into Northumbria, against Ethelfrith, against Edwin and Oswald, Oswy and Ecgfrith. But this was yet to happen. January began with deep snow and thick furs, and Osrith in the arms of Finan More, her husband, with every reason to be very, very happy.